At my team, we have 3.5 full-time caseworkers who specialize working with agencies. We have a Social Security, Medicare caseworker, a VA caseworker, which is me, and an immigration caseworker, and our half-time person is housing, IRS, OPM, Department of Labor, referrals to state and local agencies, so we catch all for everything else. And so again, in my team, and this is fairly similar to the rest of Congress, I think, we really do see ourselves as the evidence collecting arm of Congress. So we are out on the ground, we are interacting with people who are most directly affected by the policies that our DC shop works on. So when we are thinking about Social Security legislation, we're talking to our casework team about what are we seeing on the ground, how are people going to be impacted by this legislation, where are the problems that we should be fixing. Which is really interesting. When I started working at Code for Boston, I had 0 STEM background. I didn't get a smartphone until I was 22, so this was kind of a lot of life for me, but kind of realizing how close.
You're probably better off.
Who knows, I may be very more close. I don't know. I kind of realizing how close the work that I was already doing was to kind of more classic user research that you would see in the tech world. So that's kind of how we got connected. So
yeah, and we didn't as an organization, we hadn't worked with legislators before. The closest we'd come to working with the legislative body was sort of we had a state senator come and talk at one or two of our events, and working with the state council, which is sort of the closest to the legislative member. But I don't think we really knew that there was this kind of interface to the constituent services office that really was almost a bridge from the kind of work that we do that focuses a lot more on executive branch stuff, the implementation of these policies and the policy moving on through the constituent service office. So this is a new learning for us organization.
Yeah, 2 quick questions. Hopefully it doesn't, not take you off track. But what was it from your end that you saw in the Brigade that actually, signaled to you that they were a good partner in the sense that I don't know that everyone sees that connection. And did other folks in the other caseworkers see this opportunity, or was it unique to your circumstances?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I kind of tell the story about how a little more detail about how we got connected. So at the time when I reached out to Code for Boston, I was a Social Security caseworker. And here's part of the windfall innovation provision. Couple, so we talked about it earlier. Nice.
Okay, and to tell you about it, I have to say before we start, this is the best and worst deep government nerdery stuff ever.
Hell yeah.
Yes. Nerds. Government nerds. So windfall innovation provision is a obscure Social Security policy that affects people if they worked in a job that did not pay into Social Security and a job that did. Some states that are affected by this are Ohio, Kentucky, Texas, Indiana, Massachusetts. So, what happens is Social Security says you have a pension for a job where you didn't pay into Social Security, so we're going to cut your Social Security benefits when you retire. Social Security doesn't tell people that this is going to happen because they can't see your non-Social Security income. So you get to the point where you're about to retire, you think, great, I'm going to get $2,000 a month in Social Security. Social Security says, well, that's nice, you get $1,000. Which is a huge issue for people on limited incomes who are planning to do things like, say, pay off a mortgage in their retirement. And so the formula is really difficult. You cannot find all of the pieces for how the formula is calculated just as your average citizen looking for Social Security information. And so every time I got someone who says, I think I shouldn't be, I think this is a mistake, I think it's been done wrong, I had to sit down with them as a caseworker and go through all of the pieces for how this is calculated. Which was a huge time drain. I was spending, each of those meetings and 2 hours with somebody. I have 150 cases on my plate. There's just no way that I could keep doing that. So I reached out to Code for Boston, and I knew about Code for Boston because someone in our DC office was plugged into the civic tech sphere and said, "Hey, you've heard Code for America. Maybe you should get in touch." So I gave them because I was like, "This seems like it should be a calculator. It would be cool if this was an app that I could direct people to, rather than doing it." So that's how we got connected. The second
one was, is it hard for other folks in your office to make the connection that there's something here?
Yeah. So, and that's something I want to get into. So it's not only that our office gains by developing our project and all it's done, we're getting ready to launch, but we've learned more from just being involved in this tech space than we expected. So when we've been considering legislation, we've had the brigade to be like, hey, do you guys know how this works? Like, is this a good bill from your experience actually working in this area? Is this doable? Does this make sense? So we kind of got to tap into this pool of knowledge and experience that we weren't expecting to find. The other caseworkers have also really learned. So I'm plugged into Code of Boston Slack. I'm constantly stealing events and links that people posted, reposting them in my work Slack to kind of plug my team into that shared consciousness. The problem with getting the other caseworkers more directly involved is time. So I live in Boston, I commute to Salem every day, so the Code of Boston meeting is on my way home. So I can kind of afford to take every Tuesday to be there working on the team. Folks who live out in the North Shore, that's not. So part of what we're kind of trying to figure out now is how do we keep this connection going after this project is done, bringing other members into the team. So it's an open question for us how do we keep this going.
And I'll also say though, like historically, I don't know if you've all found this in working with your brigades as well, but historically that's been a problem with getting like any government partner out, like sort of after work hours, like for some reason it's only 2 stops on public transit on the subway, but like getting people across the river in Boston to Cambridge where we meet is like a giant fiasco every single week for some reason. So like this is not an uncommon thing in most ways. It's this problem.
Yeah, so I'm joined to the 3 big takeaways that I put up on the board, and then we can kind of just turn it loose. Any questions y'all have for people's experience with legislators. 3 things I really wanted to get out to you are, 1, make friends with your caseworkers, like we were just talking about. I think there's something that the brigades can offer caseworkers and the caseworkers can offer the brigades. So if you guys are working on a project where you are trying to find community partners, you're trying to find users to test, those are all things where our casework team has been able to be helpful to other Code for Boston projects.
And I think the framing that you opened with the caseworking arm, like the constituent services arm, has been this like bridge between our sort of like classic work and the legislative process was something that I hadn't thought about in 7 years of helping run Code for Boston. Like we're always trying to figure out how to actually impact policy, and like this is one way.
But again, meeting caseworkers where they are, I'm not gonna lie, it's a hard job, and a lot of it is very much the entry level role for a political office. So you're gonna get young people without a ton of experience. We're not more focused on like casework, just the churn of casework. Like I said, my office has a pretty high caseload relative to other members in our delegation, but we have 350 open cases every day. It's more than full-time work, so just keep in mind the time commitments. Caseworkers, caseworkers are plugged into the empathy side. We are working with individual constituents. So we heard me talk about this in the warehouse session, but we think about it in terms of compassion. There's the empathy, there's working with individuals, hearing stories. Caseworkers want to be able to move that into action. Congress is pretty good right now, so that action is not always we're going to pass a bill and it's going to change everything, it's going to be great. Sometimes that action is a convening role. I'm going to work with you guys to find something that makes urban policy easier for people, or build momentum around people that's actually going to change something.
I think something we talked about also, correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody has other information to this, to counter this, like the part of the congressman's office that you work with is not part of the political side.
Yes.
So that it means that we can still engage with those people even though they're a 501.
Yeah, so again, for folks who aren't so familiar with the big iron wall is in between the campaign side and the official side. So I can't talk to our campaign side, I can't use official resources from the campaign side. People come to us all the time, they go, hey, what are all those things that still help me? I'm like, yes, don't tell me, I don't want to know how you voted. I just can't do that. So I'm worried about being political. That's not an issue for me in the official office. The other thing I wanted to say sorry, question?
Oh yeah, I was just, so maybe I just didn't hear, but has legislation actually resulted from this work? What was the legislation enacted?
Sure. So we've signed out with the responsibility bills based on recommendation, in part from those cases, like knowledge that I picked up from the students.
Okay.
We haven't written, we haven't written it yet on the qualification stuff, which in part gets to what I want to talk about next week, finding the reps committees. There is another bill that we have worked on directly from our casework experience. We call it the TLDR Act. We're just about to reintroduce it. Again, based directly, coming directly from casework. We said constituents are coming to us and they're saying these letters are incomprehensible. And so we found a way to try to make, yeah, for real. So the bill would ideally standardize some constituent-facing letters to constituents. So that's the kind of legislation that's going on in casework for us.
Okay, and so, just to clarify what you were saying before, because I should know this, but I don't, like, so it's, like, for brigades, it's okay to, like, propose legislation, or I think this should exist. It's not okay to use brigade resources to say, I think this candidate should be, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
if we're
that's
just,
up to individual brigades.
Yeah, yeah.
How Code for America wants to navigate working on a political relationship or not. Because it's on one
You can be, you cannot, the line is, I'm for this candidate. So you could be for this issue, like, we support the OTA, we want you to sign an open data pledge, like, issue.
we could write the legislation, we could like write
Yeah.
legislation and.
The moment you back a candidate, because then you get partisan.
Right.
Question on, to piggyback on that, sorry, but as a 501(c), you can only, there's only so much you can do as far as lobbying, right? So is there a concern by Code for America if it's a brigade supported thing, or if it's just us private, you know, just.
It's a percentage of your operating budget,
Right.
and we're not gonna hit it. Like, and honestly, the enforcement on that's kind of iffy. So I'm not worried.
I think other guys have heard is sort of like issues, not people, is the way to go. So you can advocate, like, you can do issue-based advocacy, but you can't necessarily do like what Chris Whitaker for Congress is something that they put for Boston schools.
But there might be alignment issues, like if it was like all brigades focused on what, like, there's no, so it's only, the percentage thing is still candidate based.
The percentage thing is like direct lobbying
Yeah,
with
for candidates.
for candidates. Or no, for candidates. It's direct lobbying. But if you're just pounding the pavement, talking about issues, being an advocate for issues, you're fine.
It's like, and this is my confusion terminology, but like lobbying to me, like originally just means like getting in the lobby as they exit the session. So you're talking about dollars. So let's start making sense.
Lobbying is like directly interacting with the folks who are trying to pass the legislation.
But we're all volunteers, so it's zero budget.
Well,
So like we could lobby unlimited on volunteers.
So I don't want to derail the conversation.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll start a Slack channel or Discord.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think like putting some, I know we've done this a couple times in the past, but like actually having an official guidance document on this is probably good.
Yeah.
What's that?
and just, there's lots of ways you can get legislation passed. Like, I worked at the legislature last session in Indiana, and we got legislation passed, but it wasn't, supported by Code for America per se. It was the organization I was, in a fellowship with another organization. So, but the concern there, that being a 501(c), that concern they had was only a certain percentage of their budget can go toward that. But I guess if we are volunteers, that would satisfy because we would be paid. So I guess it's
Kind of going back to managing partnerships with that session, I think was that yesterday. I would think about it less as lobbying and more to approach with congressional offices and we want to build a relationship with you. Like, here's our tech knowledge, how can we use that to inform your member's position on, bills that are coming up on tech? Which is the other thing I did want to talk about. So not every rep has the same committee assignments, which means that their powers are vastly different for what issues they can actually be effective on. So it comes up in our office all the time. Constituents will come to us and say, hey, I've got a great idea for a healthcare bill. I want Seth Moulton to want to be really hard on this issue about, whatever healthcare thing or tax thing. And we say, fabulous, that's fantastic. Seth's committees are House Armed Services in the budget. So if he introduces legislation, it likely won't go anywhere on these issues because he's not a ranking member on the committee. So if you really want to kind of tap into the most effective way to work with your legislature, later, I would really say you should get to know what committees is your legislator on, because that'll tell you where can they actually be effective. Where will their bills have a chance of passing? So if you have someone who's on a healthcare committee, they might really want to work with you on learning more about healthcare, that might be a project that makes sense. Otherwise, it's not that, if Seth were to co-sponsor a bill, if we wanted to pass legislation on healthcare, we would try to find a co-sponsor and we could work with. So it's not out of the question, it's just a little bit less in our wheelhouse, maybe a little bit less helpful, maybe a little bit less institutional knowledge.
And I think the name.house.gov site has all the community measures on it.
Yeah, it should.
Related to that, coming from Delaware, this is a pretty relevant question. If none of your reps or senators are on a relevant committee to initiate what we're going to talk about, can you try to collaborate with folks from another state or as part of boundaries?
So I would say, yeah, so I guess there's always the co-sponsor route. Keep in mind, every congressional office still has to have caseworkers in all the right issue areas. So even though that's not on the Social Security Committee, still folks coming to us saying, hey, I'm having trouble with Social Security. And so we're still looking for a smart way to influence policy there. Just keep in mind that it might be not be our office driving it. So that is the other thing. The other co-lead on this project. But yeah, so again, that's part of why I say work with the caseworkers, because they are issue areas, even if it's not on the right committee, they'll be able to, those caseworkers are already going to be smart and saying, how can I get my office to move on my issue area? So work with them to try to figure out what they're doing.
Is there a question back here?
Could I
One, two.
hop since I'm waiting for this?
Yes.
Can I do that?
Is that okay? Let's get the money.
So I work with a lot of advocacy groups that will say do things like sign this petition to pass this bill and put in your, legislative change. Sometimes we try to get people to craft their own message. Sometimes it's just like a standard thing. And on the back side of the campaign side, people are like, great, we got 2,000 petitions to go to the offices. And that's the campaign side. But what I'm always thinking about, did that do anything? Did you just get 20 messages that say the exact same thing and it's clearly just one? What is the receiving end?
Yeah, so this came up in the policy breakout session the other day, but our rule of thumb is the more effort you put into contacting us, the more effort you get back from us. So the petitions are on hold. So, and again, I'm only speaking for my office, this is how we work. When communications come in from constituents, so petitions and letters are along the same way. So we have a mail report that we present to Congressman every couple of days that says, here's what we're hearing from our constituents in the past 3 days. And it'll be, you've got 3,000 messages on the Save the Wolves, you've got 2,000 messages on the Save Healthcare, you've got 1,000 messages on whatever.
Is that the message? That's the wolves.
Oh my God, our most active writers are our animal rights campaigns and the number of wolf letters we get. There are no wolves in the North Shore. It's fine.
Sorry. I was looking at saying that. It's a local question. Are you worried about wolves when I go to the North Shore?
No, so the wolves are local. We introduced legislation of whales, so we got to save the whales. I got you working.
That's more perfect.
So that is how we think about it. Petitions are helpful, but you can have a much greater impact. The biggest impact you can have is when you get the report. So when you reach out to an office and you get something that says, hey, I'm on the schedule, we're going to meet with you, what we want to offer you meeting with is, the caseworker. That's still really valuable because that person's going to be your advocate in the office. So face-to-face meeting, if possible, set up time for a phone call, write a handwritten letter, that petition. That is my hierarchy. Very easy.
Okay, there was a question back there, and then one here, and then I saw there was something over here. Go.
So I don't know much about the 6th District or Essex County, but I'm from a country with a lot of hollowed out little towns. Most of the kids who get into college move to Chicago or some of the big cities afterwards and never come back. So, what are some ways to engage? So to get gained the interest of members of Congress representing many mostly rural gerrymandered districts back home in civic tech, but conversely engage what talent base may remain in these rural communities.
Great question. So, I'm not probably talking about the talent base, but I'm getting them interested in civic tech. So again, you still have a casework team. And we are working with constituents who are dealing with, I think Social Security's main language is like COBOL. So, COBOL, not as a person. So, you still have constituents who are still contacting that member of Congress saying like, I am having trouble just interfacing with the government to get benefits that I deserve. And that's something that's really powerful. Like I said, each constituent services person might have up to 100 cases that are just people having trouble navigating the government. And so if you can say, look, like the VA has just redone their website, it made a difference in XYZ way. Like that's not a good way for folks to kind of talk to their own members. Say, like, there is still tech that's still helpful for your constituents to access government benefits that they deserve. One stat that like we kind of brings the line home for us, and I know other members of Congress do this too, is we look at, we keep numbers on the amount of retroactive benefits that we get our constituents back. So if someone applies for Social Security and gets held up, they wait a couple of years, eventually Social Security gives in because we were able to kind of nudge the process where it should be nudged. Get a retroactive check and keep track of it. So you can say, like, so the way we frame it is, our casework teams brought back $2.3 million for constituents of the 6th district. That is money that should have been in our community to begin with, but the process was so bad that it wasn't. So we can make that process better, money in our community, money in our
Hashtag caseworkers are awesome.
Seriously?
In terms of engaging with like,
It's a really
hashtag. No.
So we make it happen.
It's like John Oliver style. In terms of engaging with like the local, like tech talent or rural places, this is a thing that, because we're like a fairly large and established brigade, that I actually get asked all the time, and I have like very shitty and bad answers. Like I had to, when we found Coach for Boston, we had the dumb luck. This happened to be in like an international, like technology startup center. So like I actually have really bad advice on how to do recruiting. When I think there are other brigades who actually are doing some of this successfully in more rural districts. But like, at least for me and like the entire Boston team, I think like we don't actually have great advice about that. There was a question over here. Is the cost or something on like particularly on this?
I can speak to Muskogee, Oklahoma, which is a very rural area, and other places where we have grassroots technology groups. Find a local VOTEC center. The state has a lot of vocational technical schools that are in very small rural areas to teach manufacturing skills and things like that. So volunteering to give like a technology literacy talk at a VOTEC center, they would welcome you with open arms. I would also like to try to find non-profit and social work organizations that are working in those rural areas as well, and find out like what are your problems? Are you having problems? People trying to sign up for SNAP, people having problems trying to sign up for VA benefits or healthcare, or like, what are the big issues? My third suggestion would be connect with whatever the town paper is. So journalists really need a lot of help technology-wise, and the journalism industry as a whole could use some tech help, especially in small rural areas.
Thank you.
All right, this one is specifically for Anne. From your discussion, it feels as if there's a hierarchy in your delegation already, with caseworkers usually being junior employees, and then you have essentially chief of staff as a congressperson. So we can see from the Facebook hearings that congresspeople and your chiefs of staffs and aides were pretty technically inept. However, there's a natural alignment between caseworkers and brigades, since they're serving potentially the same communities. Now, how do you see the levers of power and that leverage that caseworkers might have despite being the less experienced or even the least vocal parts of the delegation, since they might not be working particularly in the political side or on anything that's potentially visible to the external world. Yeah, so how can, for example, with this calculator you're creating now, how can that move upwards that chain to ensure that the delegation is now speaking about a way more broadly, not just for your constituents, but more broadly, how to ensure that this is helpful for not just Boston, but all the other states that you mentioned that face this kind of scenario also.
Yeah, that's a great question. And part of it is being able to lead projects and working with your local brigade. So the gig workers can show like this is the value that I bring to my team, that I can bring this local knowledge and I can bring this kind of a tangible deliverable project to the policy shop, like that changes the conversation there too.
Gotcha.
It brings case workers more into the conversation. So for us on this project, on the Windfall Awareness Project, I think you shared an example of something that gets to your point really well. I'm lucky my team is, like our team is really getting together. Our legis team works really closely with our case work team, it's part of why I love working in my office. But, so we've been working on this project for a year. The chair of the House Ways Committees Committee, Brett Lowe, is getting ready to introduce, or he just introduced a bill that would be a partial repeal of the windfall elimination provision. And because our legislative staff works at Social Security knows about this policy, like he was ready to use prep to jump on that bill to get in touch with our legal staff, to actually get our concerns voiced when they're in the final stages of drafting, and then actually for us to sign on to that bill. So again, bringing that, showing that there is knowledge in the district and bringing it to DC part of why I hope caseworkers will be able to work more closely on the budget.
I think another, just in my conversations with him, another thing that I think has come up is like the way that caseworkers affect policy is often in aggregate. So like if you're dealing with the same, like it's the data side, it's the data collection side of what you're doing. So you're like, look, we have this report that goes to Seth. It's like we've dealt with, I'm assuming there's something, we've dealt with 300 windfall cases in the last 2 days. We've dealt with, 500 cases of wolf bites on the North Shore. Like, whatever it is, but like in aggregate, it reveals, that data reveals the priorities of the district to the legislator, where they need to throw their weight. I will say one other thing, which is like the knowledge of some of these like really weird parts of the federal government, or like any government, I suppose, in this case, working with a member of Congress, supposed to be a state legislator, it's like this federal stuff. Like when he showed up and told us about this like totally weird and obscure part of the Social Security code, we were all just like, what is happening in the federal government? So there's a really cool like learning opportunity. There's the other one that's even teaching about like this really specific concern. And now we know like as a team like a lot more about like how Social Security actually works.
So yeah, actually, can you speak more of that benefit?
Yeah.
The brigade is gaining federal knowledge. We really don't know how the government works, any level of government. So now you as a brigade are now being informed more broadly about governmental function.
You can have your hand up.
Yeah, I actually kind of have two questions. The first is like, so Massachusetts has what, like 8 Congress people or 9? Okay, so this problem's probably in all of Massachusetts. So can you talk a little bit about how you expanded, or how or if you've like taken the work that you've done to your other people that do VA district stuff for the other districts? Second, I really love legislatures, and our state legislature is kind of the place where we see the ability to make a lot of impact potentially, but the legislators in our state legislature have no control over their staff, and also, yes, it's an interesting situation. Yes.
Are they like employed by the legislature?
Yes, yes, and you get assigned a person, and a lot of them are just like old, which is fine, but also like,
Not tech savvy.
sure.
Just for you, everyone else has been working where
I'm in Kentucky.
The job has changed and the people have not.
The job has not changed, but it should, and people also. So I don't know if anybody here or if you guys have any experience working with legislators on the state level, but there really isn't as much like ability to have staff that do constituent services, so you are oftentimes like interfacing directly with the legislator, and that has its own set of like issues. So
Keep in mind, I think in every state there's also a really strong state federal connection, so I work super closely with our local state representatives. Because no one knows how government works, they get people coming to be on issues in other states, so much.
Absolutely. But all the way down to local level. Like,
Exactly.
actually, the state people get skipped a lot, I think, like the local and the
Yeah.
federal, like in the
Exactly.
state.
Which, poor things, but
Yeah.
trying to get people back over there. And so sometimes talking to your federal delegation, they might have a backdoor, the right person you should talk to is the state side, and you can get in touch directly with that instead of going through the staff.
I don't know, like everybody knows about Massachusetts, it's basically like straight blue all the way. So I don't know how that
Our
actually.
district, we have the most bipartisan district in Massachusetts,
Is that
it does
true?
not say anything.
So I don't know how that would actually work though in like a place where there's like a really fractured sort of like political scene.
That's, yeah,
So I just don't know.
it's a big issue.
Just, I think being present, like being involved, like, and it's not easy with people having day jobs to go to the legislature when they're in session all day, but if you ever get the opportunity, I think just being present and listening and finding a committee that has some interesting bills. Most states have websites, so you can check that information out, but I think the more engaged you are, so even if you don't have a particular proposal or idea or solution, just engaging with your local or your state legislator, and so they know you know them, invite them to a brigade meeting, so they can just start hearing organically what those issues are, getting to know you. I found like they're actually, a lot of them are fairly approachable, and yes, some of them are getting older, but I think it's just all the way in how you approach the person. And I kind of like working directly with the legislator, because it feels like you have, you're not going to just be passed off to someone. But I guess we don't have, in Indiana, the state legislature doesn't have caseworkers that I know of. So,
Sometimes, again, I can't really speak for other states, but sometimes the Senate side will have a larger staff, we don't actually have someone who's dedicated constituent services person. Because there's somebody in Massachusetts, so. Keep in mind, yeah, the legislators are also nerds, these weird, like, ins and outs of the policy, so a lot of, we're kind of make friends that lead to partnerships with.
I think you put your finger on something that always we hold as one of like the goals of coming from Boston. I think is like building tech is cool and all those things, but a lot of our work in the brigade, like overall missions, are really like demystifying empowerment. So like for everyone who our member gets to work with them and like learns more about how like this governance stuff actually works, it like removes that level of like that mystique around government. Like it's not just some weird like force that like controls all of our lives most seriously. It's like a thing we can touch. And that's like the more you can get people like that in and like do things like get out there and actually see it. Like, I don't know, we found that that's a really compelling case for
Actually, on our project, we're coming up to the final stages of this app, and so we have to do some user testing, so we've done user testing at my house's town halls. And so we've got some of our brigade members who come to the town hall, they get to sit through all of it, do some user testing with the actual people who are engaged, who are demographic. They got to meet my boss and ask some questions of their own, so yeah, exactly, it's been a great opportunity for everybody to consider. Yeah, some questions.
So I'm gonna, so given particularly seeing this definitely play out in New York State, that there can sometimes be a tension when when the legislature decides to pass something that the executive branch does not want to do, and like sometimes they'll veto it, and sometimes it'll get approved still, overridden. But I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on the best way to, particularly so for us at the county level. County doesn't want to do anything with open data, or I should say that the county executive isn't really interested in open data. The city has been doing a great job. The legislature is an area of opportunity where like some legislators are interested. Do you think it is like just from a not a partisan lens, but like from just a politically strategic way to try to get like the legislature to be like, all right, let's pass it on the data thing, or is it like too heavy-handed on the executive side? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a system that exists, and we have great intention in it. That kind of leads me to the other thing that I wanted to make sure that I agree with you guys, which is that working for the legislative office is not just passing bills, and there are other we think of our job as kind of a couple of different pieces of responsibility. There's not only policy making legislation, but there's also oversight and accountability of executive branch agencies. So congressional hearings, like formal letters on letterhead that comes out with the Senate signature that say, why are you not, in the case of working on right now, why is the HHS FOIA office completely understaffed and appeals are taking 4 years? So that's another thing where you can kind of use that antagonistic role a little bit. It's like that's institutional, that's structural, that's what it's there for.
Right.
I think that's helpful. The other thing is the convenient role too. I think part of my strengths of the business when I leave this job is when I call somebody and say, hey, I'm from Congressman Seth Moulton's office, I'd love to talk to you about what you're doing. Like, people tend to return my phone calls. Nice. So if you can kind of use your brigade out, if you're in trouble with your executive branch agency, talking to someone in the congressional office who can make that phone call and say, we'd love to connect you with my local brigade and have some questions for you about how you're against it and do that, or what's the value of it.
So we can connect later if you want, like we've got examples in Boston of open data policies that have been executed either by like executive order at the city of Boston level or by sort of more like the legislative process in the city of Cambridge. Like they both come with like pluses and minuses in terms of like process and also like their ability to stick. But we can talk about that later. But that's like slightly orthogonal, like what editorial do. It's like don't get your hopes up on New York City legislation.
Yeah.
Or the legislature. Last time I looked, they were the least efficient legislature in the country in terms of like bills proposed and bills passed. So like,
with the, just building on what you were saying with like using some of the other capacities of the caseworkers, that's been one of the most exciting aspects of working with Anne on the Open for All Nation project, Open for All Awareness project. Just the ways that she's able to go through the Washington contacts and the congressional research research service, CRS, and other avenues that the Congress has access to, and convert that into like specific changes that we can make in our code. So not only is it like going to town halls and interacting with the actual users, but also being able to navigate the federal system. So don't confuse the legislature with this fantastic alignment of what a lot of our members are trying to do with what the caseworkers are automatically set up to do. I think.
one second. Was there somebody else back here who had a question before? No? Okay, 1, 2.
Do you have a list of other things that you would want your brigade to work on? But I'm curious, we have, like, I didn't know that there were caseworkers really. We talked about legislative assistants and like district directors. We have other offices, but I don't really know what to do. Like, when I'll meet with them just because I feel like, oh, we should meet and talk about what we're doing, and sometimes we'll talk about legislation or policy, but I haven't really ever found a good sort of practical and tactical way to engage on a local level. It sounds like you've got, I hadn't ever even thought of going to them for projects. Do you have like a, do you have, if people were to approach your caseworker cohort and be like, hey, what else can we build for you? Would you?
Wow. Now that you mention it. So what really surprised me actually was the stuff that my brigade was already working on that would fit well with what our team needed. So there's a project that Boston's working on migrant service map, trying to like use a cool mapping platform to let people who are working with migrants like find resources that are available in the community. I have to be an immigration caseworker who like is really excited for when this launches and she can use it because that's exactly what we do. Work on the social work adjacent, we find resources in our community. We're going to be sending folks there. So, not really answering your question. There are.
But kind of, it is. I mean, it's
yeah,
okay,
I can
cool.
only think of some others. I also don't want to monopolize my brigade's time. So they've already been working with me for 9 months on a way follow me. 9 months. We're about to deliver.
Can I ask?
Can I mention one more thing on the federal level?
Yeah.
So something we discovered in the state of Oklahoma is that at the federal level, for SNAP, which is the food stamp program, at the federal level, they have gotten rid of the screening tool that states can use. OKDHS, the Oklahoma Department of Human Services that administers SNAP in Oklahoma, was using the federal screening tool to help people figure out whether they may or may not be eligible for SNAP, because the application is long and arduous. And so a screening tool is basically just a quick way to find out whether you may or may not be eligible. The federal government has gotten rid of the screening tool, and so now states who are using that tool can no longer use it. We have decided to build our own screening tool so that residents in Oklahoma can use it. And we're working with a nonprofit in Oklahoma called Free Oklahoma that has formed a relationship with the state legislature that has agreed to and is happy that somebody else is developing a screening tool because the federal government's gotten rid of it. So that's another idea for something that you can work on at your local level that has, that's a result of something that happened in the federal government.
You remember this raised my internal temperature several degrees. with that news.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So benefits.gov, I know that's not even close to the capacity of the states.
So one, two.
I was going to respond to what he was saying.
Yeah.
Because I'm a former district director for Senator in the state of Michigan. So most people come to their office, into office, for a purpose. If you connect with senators and reps who, if you study them and figure out why they're there, why they came to office, and just connect directly to them, call their office, email them, and find out what it is that makes them tick. You can make a lot of headway. And connect with, don't discount the staffers as well, because most of them around the staff for almost everything.
So is there something that you want to be answered for? Like that's what I would say, like what I find is I don't usually know, like I know you're talking about the elections I think, but like I don't really know what my purpose is in having the meetings this time. So it's like, oh, you don't want to talk about what we're working on, and see if there's anything. But look, I don't, the federal government seems so far removed from things that we are working on or what we can do. It's like, I'm not going to ask you for money. I'm not going to ask you for support. I could ask you for an intro if I needed, like, but usually I don't because they're local relationships anyway. So, I don't know. I guess I wonder if there's any, like that, like if I could ask for problems that we can solve. That's a pretty concrete thing, but I think it's cool. But I don't know if there's other things that I'm missing that are like, the directors want to be hearing.
A lot of times they're sitting waiting on people to contact them.
Yeah.
Seriously. So,
right.
So, I mean, I think if you engage them, they'll be more than happy to help.
Yeah.
Or just ask your research team, what are your worst, like, what's popping up in your case, what are your trends?
Yeah, no, I love that. I didn't think about it.
I think a big takeaway, like that's sort of emerging from this from I know that we have felt this way in our brigade is just like that this wing of our federal representatives like exists and is a really good entry point. It's a really good like way to for brigades to do the work that we do in a way that's meaningful for the legislative side. So like, we've been looking for way meaningful for our legislators for a long time. Like increasingly like realizing that like the policy behind like everything that we do is like a half should be policy. And how do we get the policy to be better? And like this is like one way of starting to start the conversation.
Yeah, so two things that might seem unrelated, but I think actually are in terms of my position and how I'm doing it. So how can we support you? Is there a national convening of your folks that, look what they did here? You know, you caseworkers can be as cool as Ann. And then the other is sort of, you might see the connection here. So I think, you know, something that all levels of representative find really cool right now, want to get involved in, is supporting an entrepreneurial community, like more small business and business owners and all this stuff. And I think it's, you know, super awesome that we compartmentalize ourselves sort of away from that world to some degree. But what is the intersection there in terms of like I don't know if there is a representative that's like not trying to do this. at any level, and how do we sort of navigate the general compartmentalization we do between like us being volunteers and trying to provide something of civic need, and then figuring out how we can support these spaces that are going to be of benefit to folks. I mean, Ariana spoke of this earlier, and then also look really good for representatives and something that they're constantly trying to do.
Yeah, so, and that's, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because that is another kind of book for getting the members' office interested. It's like, hey, if we're gonna partner together, like, that's a huge media win.
Yes.
Say, like, look at this awesome thing that we were able to deliver for our constituents, so that's huge. Don't worry, it's coming.
I can't wait to meet.
But, yeah, so that's a great question, just on the structure available to caseworkers. And this has been, I'll say, this has been one thing that I've been worried about and thinking a lot about since I became a caseworker, because there's, we were talking about this a little bit the first folks who are here. There's not really a great structure. Like, the caseworkers tend to be pretty siloed. We're each in district offices, so we're cut off from each other. It really depends on the state, it depends on the political makeup of the state, geography of the state, how close the caseworkers interact. Again, Massachusetts is pretty lucky because we're close. We can all go get together and meet in person, and we do about once a quarter. By issue area, so the VA caseworkers will get together and be like, hey, here's what trends in our casework, how can we work together as a delegation? There are some resources to try to plug into and I'm going to be working on this when I get home, to kind of raise awareness for working brigades. There's a listserv. It's the worst thing in the world. Listserv that every caseworker should be on.
Around the country.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's the worst inbox spam, but like sometimes helpful for sharing content. So I'm trying to write this up for those folks. There are also some era Congress organizations. So Center for Congressional Management Foundation does casework stuff. So it's partnership for public service. And we've talked to them about the work that we're doing with.
What's it called? Public service?
Partnership for public service with BS. The speaker's office as well does some districts, you probably heard of these or seen it, but some district director conferences where those folks get together to share best practices. So I hope that this is something Congress does more of, because honestly I think the future of casework is trying to figure out ways to share data between caseworkers to try to follow up national trends and direct those solutions to those national trends to the offices that actually have a real call to make policy change. So that is my ideal future for casework, but I think we're a long way off from it.
I saw a question.
That's a quick question. Are there any red lanyards in the room? Okay. I wanted to take like a big panel picture for propaganda purposes. I will do my best to figure it out. Cool. Okay. Yeah. Just stand behind him. Okay. Okay. You're fine. Oh,
Sorry. You meant red lanyards, not red liners.
No. Okay. Anyone who doesn't want to take it. Okay, I'm taking very excited. I'm taking pictures. Keep going.
That just reminded me a question that Aisha would probably be helpful is what happens when a representative changes. So what happens when someone retires or they get replaced in the House seat? It really depends on the state, just keeping in mind if you're trying to build a partnership. In a lot of states, so I said caseworkers are entry level, that is true.
Can you remind us for the general House of Representatives how often they get replaced?
2 years. 2 years terms with House of Representatives.
So what's an average tenure or median tenure of a representative? It's like a couple years or like 10 years?
I really think it varies.
Okay.
It's very wide.
Yeah, yeah.
Presumably they change every 30 days.
Yeah.
What's that 30 days?
So there's turnover at the office level and turnover at the staff level, and both of them are challenges to building up a working partnership with the congressional office. So if the member changes, sometimes the caseworkers stay, especially if it's a friendly transition. If someone retired and then someone ran for their seat, sometimes the caseworkers will stay for that continuity. Like our cases can go several years. We have some cases that have been, we've been working on as long as I've been in office, and we expect that we will be for years to come. So there's trying to kind of keep that continuity. But in the event that they don't, that's a drawback to working with the brigade. Like work can go away. So working with the Senate offices is sometimes a way to mitigate that, but the Senate offices have a high workload. based on where we're gonna get to the right person, I find. But then, yeah, also really good point, congressional staffers are not paid very well. The budget for Congress has congressional offices has been stable since the late 70s, so the number of people each member represents has gone up to 30% since that time, in some districts. So it's really being asked to do more with less. Caseworkers are entry level, you don't want to do casework forever because there's some serious burnout, some pretty major vicarious trauma that can happen, especially if you're not well supported by your office. So just another thing to keep in mind is that you might not be working with the same person forever. If you think your caseworker might leave, try to come up with a transition plan.
I do have a question. And maybe this has been answered, I'm sorry, because I've been in and out a little bit. But I am here with National Unemployment Week as well. And one thing that I have found is that, especially amongst like municipal politicians, there's an inherent distrust of anything new around coding or data. Like, oh, we can't let these strange hackers get into our data. But instead they're trusting like people and paper and microfiche, which is
Taxes.
like, how do you navigate that particular discussion that this is a viable entity that has documented projects that have had huge impact to a person that is not as well versed in coding or the work that we do?
Sure. So I will say that hasn't so much been a part of this project, so this is not something I've some experience in. Where I think there's value in working with caseworkers is focusing on that user experience, on the experience of the constituent who's trying to navigate their own government. And what's the impact of that if it's not, if you are working on paper and development, and all that good stuff. Part of how we tackle that for our project is, so again, it's it's visual third party. We're hoping that eventually gets along with something like AARP or master's degrees, so it's not connected to Social Security. But there's a print my results option that we specifically designed so someone could walk into their Social Security office and say, hey, I did my own calculation, these are all the little things, like all of the insurance steps. Can you please verify this in your stupid outdated system for me?
Yes.
So that's been our approach. I wish I had never answered your question.
I think I can talk a little bit about how we maybe touched that in Boston historically. I think that like it's going to be like a little bit of a should be like aspirational answer. I just say like be relentless. It took us 4 years of advocacy and training and hosting committee meetings to get like an open data ordinance passed in the city of Cambridge. I testified in front of city council like 5 or 6 times just me, not having anybody else in the brigade. Had like a lot of personal meetings, had like a ton of stuff, and it took 4 years. Even that took 4 years to get like the city councilors to like think about technology in a different way. So I don't know if there's actually a substitute for that.
See, I got the relentless, I thought there was a cheat code.
I mean, I think that's been one of the big findings that this work over 10 years is like there is no cheat code. Like technology is awesome, but so much of it is like ground level advocacy.
But there's detailed things that that kind of partnership with caseworkers is so exciting for, because a lot of us software workers, like we get really excited about the details just like policy workers. So in the meantime, while the big broad stroke stuff is worked on, we have
coming back to fun.
So yeah.
I think would also help to have like success stories that you could share, so that you can see other brigades having success within their cities and states.
Yeah, and I think for us, and again, we're like a total outlier because of our size and reach, but like we've been there for 7 years, and we have 70 people coming every week, and that gives you a little bit more weight when you go talk to somebody. So like,
I'm
emphasizing that.
Did you talk about how you became aware of Yeah, so her whole process of becoming aware of Corporate Boston was sort of channeled through the past projects that we had. So we had clearly demonstrated like some of the things, but I think that will be increasingly the case for all of your brigades over time. So that's exciting.
And at least we're thinking back into like the early period of Corporate crossings development. Like this is so stupid, but like that track jacket is a key that can open. Like it sounds so dumb. Like that track jacket is a key that can open doors because almost everybody, like the Code for America reputation, you're standing on top of that. And so like that'll open some doors at least in some places. More than just like if you just showed up and were like, hi Harlem here to like help. Like, hi Harlem, here to help.
So would you like have to jump someone with one of those?
Go for the ones that have the stripes, those are work.
Yes. I want to add, there, like, I actually don't remember the brigade, and I have to take the link, but if you want, I'm happy to do it, because people need to. Someone did some great documentation, like, at multiple lengths, like, brief and longer, of like, what's the value of open data to the company. I should always procure open data. Is that what someone know what I'm talking about?
There's like the open data.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably actually several, but like, I think we should all like.
I'd take out
use those together. Yes, as we were saying about.
I believe there is a spreadsheet of lots of publications like that floats around. I think it's linked in a few places in Discourse. It shows up in Slack every couple of months.
Yep.
We could probably, if someone can dig that spreadsheet up and drop it into the Discourse for this topic too.
Yeah, I will drop something.
I probably have a point to it, so if you can't find it, I'll try and find it.